Kim's presentation last week was directed towards HR. For those of you who attended last Tuesday's webinar, you'll remember her session was focused on the inside of the organization. And she reminded us of something very important, and that is to authentically connect with the outside world, you need to connect with yourself first. And Kim also reminded us that your organization's team members are your best brand ambassadors. In fact, when your team does connect on the inside, they can build very powerful relationships with all of your stakeholders. Jeremy's presentation today will address new approaches to business strategy. He'll describe the change that is taking place in our complex world and how this change has expanded the universe of complex stakeholders you must now engage. My presentation next Tuesday is going to be geared towards branding, sales, and marketing. And I'll talk to you about how you can tap into the life within your organization to create a very powerful public brand and distinguish your organization from any other. We designed this webinar series to show you the connectivity amongst all your stakeholders, from stakeholders in the organization to those outside of the organization. In essence, everyone in your community or organization should understand how their role plays a very important part in broad, authentic stakeholder connectivity. Jeremy, oh, thank you. So there's a few key concepts that we reviewed last week, and I'll do that again just briefly right now. When we talk about business in transition, we're talking about the very drastic changes taking place on a global level. I think we all know we're in a 21st century global innovation economy, and we're all experiencing these big shifts. We've got global teams and supply chains that are working in different time zones, they're using different languages, and they're sharing their various cultures. We have new technologies emerging that help us collaborate, socialize, and share information. And nations and states around the world are facing severe economic, social, and environmental challenges, and they're also devising new adaptive strategies. When we talk about stakeholders, we mean anyone impacted by your company and its behavior, from your shareholders, employees, suppliers, partners, even competitors, to the community where your supply chain operates, and also, of course, your customers. So individually, I think we all see how important these stakeholder relationships are. It's easier to see them on a personal level, but in the bigger scheme, it's harder to see. And so the question becomes, does your organization as a function as a whole with this coordinated awareness of stakeholder engagement and impact? When we talk about authentic connection, we're talking about the organization and its stakeholders being in transparent alignment. And if you're following and using social media, I'm sure you realize that today we must be transparent in business. In terms of sustainable strategy, we're talking about a strategy that has staying power in the new shifting business world. And authentic connection is at the center of that strategy. It's not just so you can be sustainable, but you can be wildly successful in achieving your long-term goals. With that said, I'd love to introduce Jeremy Stover. Jeremy is founder of Connected Advantage, a company that specializes in developing leaders and helping organizations get the most from their teams. He's worked with corporate giants and high-tech startups like Google, Microsoft, Young Presidents Organization, and Medtronic. He helps them identify their inherent strengths and skills so they can amplify those and use them for business success. By recognizing each team member as naturally creative and resourceful, Jeremy helps organizations learn to evoke strengths that serve the individual while creating more productivity and success for the whole. Jeremy loves to travel around the world, and he uses his coaching skills to help professionals from all walks of life. In fact, today he's on his way to Istanbul for YPO's Global Leadership Summit, and we wish you a very safe and wonderful trip, Jeremy. Jeremy is an MBA candidate at Presidio Graduate School, and he's pursuing his MBA in Sustainability and Management, and he's also on the faculty with the Coaches Training Institute. I met Jeremy through Kim Cadle, who I previously worked with at Otis Spunkmeyer, and I'm getting to know Jeremy through this webinar series. I'm really inspired to collaborate with you, Jeremy, because you share my beliefs that we must embrace change, including new business models, and we must respect each other and every person's spirit and contribution as we work to create much more inspiring business environments. So with that, Jeremy, why don't we go ahead and get started with your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula.
You bet.
And welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in this morning from wherever wherever you are in the world. This is absolutely my favorite topic to be able to talk about this morning, and I'm excited to share it with you. I believe that this is one of the most, when we look at the sustainability crisis, I think it is going to require us, whether we do it proactively or reactively, to change the way we do business on a fundamental level. And the stakeholder strategy feels like a cornerstone of that change. I'm going to start out here by sharing a little bit of Jeffrey Schwartz's. I ran into this on the Harvard Business Review. It's essentially a blog entry. This is Jeffrey Schwartz. You can tell a lot about how your day is going to unfold by the number of emails that are waiting for you. I'm a pretty early riser, 4 a.m. most days, so I typically start out ahead of the game when it comes to email. But on June 1st, 2009, they kept coming and coming and coming. The first one accused Timberland of supporting slave labor, destroying Amazon rainforests, and exacerbating global warming, all in the first sentence. The second was a repeat of the first, as was the next and the next. I had a funny feeling it was going to be a long day. The fan mail was from Greenpeace supporters reacting to a newly released Greenpeace report about deforestation in the Amazon. The gist of the report was, A, Brazilian cattle farmers are illegally clear-cutting Amazon rainforests to create pastures. B, the leather from their cows might be winding up in shoes, including Timberland. A plus B equals C. New Hampshire-based bootmakers are desecrating the environment. Take them to task, and take us to task they did. The senders didn't threaten a boycott, but they said they were concerned and urged us to work with Greenpeace to find a permanent global solution to both deforestation and climate change. Next on the agenda was figuring out how to respond, not just to Greenpeace's allegations, but to the angry senders who totaled 65,000 over the next few weeks. I figured if that many people were taking the time to send an email, there must be at least 500,000 not sending emails who are also pissed off. It's a big number. Our brand's reputation was at stake. I'll make sure you get the link to this in the document that we send following this talk, so you can read the rest of the story and see how it turns out. But this is Timberland, a company known for its environmental stewardship, and here they were caught reacting to their stakeholders on this. Another example, common example, is Walmart. They're dealing with feminists, human rights advocates, anti-sprawl activists, labor unions, who all feel the organization is causing harm in some way in its effort to provide low prices. Nestle was pressured into a zero deforestation policy on its palm oil supply chain after Greenpeace launched a campaign that generated 200,000 emails in just a few days. Fruit of the Loom caved to pressure from the largest ever student boycott. It's estimated to have cost the company about $50 million. In addition to activists and the general public, there are local, state, national, and foreign governments, shareholders, shareholder activists, banks, NGOs, employees, suppliers, interest groups, the media, the competition, the list goes on. And even if we're not the CEO or in an external facing role, these days our organizations are highly matrixed, and our roles often require us to be strategic about our relationships on whatever projects we're working on, especially those who we do not have direct authority over but must influence in some way. Today's stakeholder world is considerably more complex, and as we'll discuss, business strategy needs to evolve to meet the changing complexity. Sometime in the past, business was quite a bit simpler. Family-sized organizations had really two groups of stakeholders to deal with, suppliers and customers. They took raw materials from their suppliers, converted them into products, and sold those to their customers. But then with the advent of the corporation, this picture changed. So we now had shareholder owners who managers were responsible to, as well as a larger employee group creating employee unions. This change brought with it a change in strategy, a change in thinking, a change in the tools and best practices that were used, and it emphasized good management being responsible for creating shareholder value. to that one particular group, and incentives were created to incentivize managers to prioritize that above all else. As that movement and thinking grew, the time frame also became shorter, so it became quarterly returns. So now good management was defined as being able to provide the maximum amount of returns for this one stakeholder group, the shareholders, in a very short period of time. This period was epitomized, it can be epitomized by Jack Welch, for whom ruthlessly managing short-term profit maximization was almost a sacred responsibility. After the crash in 2008, he was quoted, I'm paraphrasing here, but he was quoted saying, "This has all been a very bad idea." Today's manager faces an even more complex picture. The internet age and a reaction to the success and dominance of the corporate world has created a much more complex picture. This is a list of basically what would fit on the screen. There's even more beyond this. To illustrate the point, I'll use the example of Chick-fil-A. Many of their customers share conservative Christian values, and so in line with that, they're closed on Sundays. They have a CEO who espouses those values, including what Christians feel is the traditional definition of marriage. Following comments he made in public, the mayors of Boston and Chicago said that they would not give the company a business license to operate. This is in the news just a few months ago, inside their cities. Ironically, the ACLU got involved on the side of Chick-fil-A and said the mayors were out of line. Activists staged a kiss-off to protest Chick-fil-A. Students organized on several campuses to boycott and block Chick-fil-A on campus. The Jim Henson Company and the Berenstain Bears pulled their toys, books, and names from kids' meals and corresponding promotions. Politicians like Mike Huckabee and Sarah Palin got involved, organizing a day of support where Chick-fil-A experienced record sales and a show of public support. Eventually, Chick-fil-A changed course. Its charitable foundation adopted a new policy to not donate any funds to organizations that promote discrimination, and indicated they'd pursue fair, non-discriminatory treatment for their employees. The city of Chicago then allowed plans for a second location to move forward. Whatever your feelings on this issue, it's clear today's management works in a complex world with relationships that are mostly out of our control, but yet have a substantial impact on our businesses. Good management today requires navigating complex relationships with these external stakeholders. And just as the shift from the production worldview to the managerial worldview produced changes in the best practices, strategy, tools, and behavior, so too the stakeholder worldview requires a new approach and overall strategy. In a stakeholder worldview, our ability to prioritize, organize, and manage relationships is our key to success, to understand not only our own goals and objectives, but those of our stakeholders, and to begin to find alignment between the two. This is a stakeholder map from Coca-Cola's CSR report from a few years ago. It looks very similar to the picture that I just had up there. And I want to check in with people who are on the line right now. Put up a little poll here just to find out what stakeholders are you mostly concerned with? So in your role, are they mostly internal to the organization, external to your organization, neither, or something else? It looks like we don't have very many something else, but if it is something else, go ahead, put that in the chat window and we can see it and bring it in as well. Okay, great. All right, last few votes coming in. I'll go ahead and close that and share the results. So looks like about a third of us are concerned with internal stakeholders, 17%, about a fifth of us, those external, and then half are looking to help others work with their stakeholders. So great. Good mix. I'm going to be talking mostly about external stakeholders in this talk, but I think most of what I'm saying and the tools you'll get at the end are very applicable to internal stakeholders as well. All right, the next case study I want to talk about is a company called Malden Mills. Multi-stakeholder work is not easy. It can be expensive, although it doesn't have to be. It takes time and resources, whether we're doing it on a small scale individually or whether it's an organization-wide effort. It will require the organization to be more transparent and work harder, so why bother? The next case study illustrates some of the benefits of that. It's a case study done at the University of Arkansas. I'll include a link to this one as well. In 1995, the Malden plant in Lawrence, Massachusetts erupted in flames. 36 workers were seriously injured. The accident destroyed 3 critical manufacturing buildings and threatened to put 3,000 employees in a small town out of work. The CEO responded quickly and was able to not only successfully resolve the crisis, but receive widespread critical acclaim for how he handled it. After the crisis, the Boston Globe declared it to be an industrial accident, a very favorable interpretation. The media publicized Malden Mills as an example of corporate responsibility. Customers stood by the company and no orders were canceled. Contrast this with the CEO of Union Carbide, who, when he arrived at the scene of an industrial accident in India, he was arrested. That company had done the traditional thing, put their own concerns ahead of their stakeholders, and the result was denials and withholding information that escalated the situation. The interesting thing about the case study was that the authors attributed the support from the community, employees, and customers, and the favorable media attention they received to the pre-crisis multi-stakeholder work that Malden had engaged in. Prior to the fire, the CEO had worked extensively with the unions to make sure the workers were treated fairly. They had the highest pay of any textile mill in America. This is at a time when many plants were being moved to other countries to cut costs. At one point, they had to do layoffs, but they promised the employees their jobs back when they began to hire again. And most of the employees took them seriously and refused to seek other work. Over time, they were able to hire back 100% of the employees who had been laid off and were available. Malden had invested heavily in customer relationships with transparency and open communication. They had a policy of being open, candid, and accessible to the media. During the crisis, those same values and policies came to the fore. While the factory was still burning, the CEO made the announcement that they would continue to operate. Because of the prior relationships and communications, when he communicated to customers that they would be able to meet their pre-crisis orders, people trusted that it was so and no one canceled. Malden used the media to disseminate information as to meetings and other news that they were sharing. Communications were focused on the needs of the stakeholders and not the narrow interests of the organization. And this was consistent with the practice and pattern in place prior to the crisis, and that's a key point. So the first tier of benefits to doing stakeholder engagement work is the risk management benefits. Better community relations, improved public image, conflict mitigation, cost containment when it comes to litigation, boycotts, etc. There's a possibility for getting reduced regulatory timeframes if a regulatory body is involved. And the last one here, maintenance of a social license to operate and expand. One of the key shifts going on is a shift back towards business depending on communities and stakeholders for their license to operate. And by taking care of stakeholders, corporations put themselves in the best position to maintain that. The next tier of benefits is the early warning benefits. And I've had several opportunities to speak with Andy Rubin, who was until recently one of the top strategists at Walmart. I'm paraphrasing here, but his take on stakeholders is that it's important not to get into the mode of trying to please everyone. That's A, impossible, and B, not what corporations do best. Corporations work best when they can focus on specific goals for success, which is unlike government that has a very different role and contribution. However, he felt that corporations were while maximizing shareholder value, would be foolish not to pay attention to what is a great source of information, the stakeholders. In the information age, it's impossible to know everything that could impact your business now and in the future, and therefore utilizing our stakeholders is key to staying on top of trends, shifting market dynamics, and serving the customers. So this is the second tier of benefits, early warning benefits. The final tier, the third tier, is strategic benefits. We're going to talk about level of ambition in a moment, but this generally requires more significant commitment by the organization to the process. However, the results are also more significant. This is where Michael Porter's essay on shared value comes into play, and I'll try to get a link for that one as well. So I want to do another poll here. From a practical standpoint, let's see, the benefits that you're interested in or feel like are most relevant to your organization are the risk management, early warning, or the strategic, transformational. Okay, good. Let's see. All right. Well, we know what we're here to talk about this morning then. I'll go ahead and close this one. And so we had 100% of people looking at the strategic transformational. So perfect. You'll enjoy the next two case studies. And then we'll get into the how-to. So if you're already sold on this and you're waiting for the how-to, it is coming. Okay, the next case study, I get really excited about this one. This is the Sustainable Shipping Initiative. This is a transformational, strategic transformational multi-stakeholder engagement. Maersk, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, approached the Forum for the Future, which is a nonprofit group that organizes these cross-industry engagements. And they asked them to do an engagement with the shipping industry. Because Maersk was involved and because Forum for the Future had a good reputation for doing these things, they were able to get a wide number of organizations to come to the table and participate in the process. Engineers and service providers, Daewoo and Shipbuilding and Wärtsilä, the biggest names in maritime shipping, including Maersk, BP Shipping, Cargill, Carnival, which is cruise, not shipping, but China Navigation, Gearbulk, and more. Banks and insurers, ABN AMRO and RSA, the standards body, Lloyd's, Register, and DNV, shipping customers, ASCO Nobel and Unilever being the big ones, and the WWF also participated. They collectively created a vision, so they gathered this group of people without a vision, without an agenda, but held a series of meetings to co-create a vision that included changing to a diverse mix of energy sources to reduce greenhouse gas intensity, providing safe and healthy work environments where employees can enjoy rewarding careers, to be partners in communities in which they operate, to develop financial solutions that reward sustainable performance and large-scale technology innovation. So making some of the changes that will increase fuel efficiency are technically challenging and expensive to do, so creating those financial tools to be able to do that, and to foster transparency and to enable better business decision making. They're currently in the implementation phase, so the benefits will be seen over time, but this is a remarkable collaboration, and it's one that was initiated proactively by Maersk in order to better address its own sustainability challenges. By engaging in this process, it's enhanced its brand and image and its relationships with governments, agencies, NGOs, and activists, customers, and competitors. So significant investment, but significant benefits. This is also a transformational strategic engagement. This the Sustainable Food Lab was founded by Hal Hamilton. I got to speak with him at Sodexo's corporate headquarters. Sodexo is, I didn't know this, you may know of Sodexo, but they serve more meals each day than McDonald's. They do food in cafeterias across the country for workplaces and schools. things like that, universities. So Hal was a commercial dairy farmer from Vermont. He was interested in developing the local community. As many farmers are, he became aware of the non-sustainability of current practices, that there would need to be changes in the way that the food system, the food industry was conducted. He came to the conclusion that meaningful change was only possible at the systemic level, and in partner with Peter Senge's team, the Food Lab was born. It brought together a diverse set of industry stakeholders, including big companies like Costco, Unilever, Ben & Jerry's, Walmart, Sodexo, Starbucks, and other individuals like local farmers with small holdings, activists, public interest organizations like Oxfam and WWF. They took representatives from each organization through a 6-month process where they visited in person many parts of the food production chain, including farms and rainforests in Brazil, industrial farms, organic farms. They went to Ethiopia and Kenya. They called these learning journeys, and through these learning journeys, the representatives got to know one another. So in addition to what they were discussing, they formed relationships with each other. One success story that Hal shared that stood out for me was when he spoke about a vice president from Costco who, at the beginning of the process, felt that Costco was doing a great job and cited their philanthropic contributions, and felt pretty strongly that that was the extent that corporations were responsible. But then along the way, at one point, he had a big realization after having been in conversation with an activist for a local farming community. He started to put it together that the sustainability crisis was going to be a big impact to their supply chain. It wasn't about necessarily doing good, it was about making smart business decisions. And since then, Costco has invested in small communities of farmers, and they've done quite a lot. They've become known in the sustainability community for proactive stakeholder management.
Hey, Jeremy, I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, feel free as we're moving through to just jot them down, send them over, so that, this is a lot of great case studies, a lot of great information. But while you have the question, feel free to send it over, and we'll address it during the Q&A.
Great. So next poll, I want to know how to figure out where to start, get clear on what this will take, do some stakeholder mapping, conduct collaborative or transformative, I can't read the end of my own poll question there, but you can. Or 0%, do something else. Great. Anybody a last vote coming in? Okay, let's see. So it looks like 11% figure out where to start, 33% get clear on what this will take, 44% do some stakeholder mapping, and 78% conduct collaborative. We got a transformative focus group. That's great.
We do. This is fantastic. Excellent.
So we're going to cover all of these things in the next few slides. So step one, when it comes to doing stakeholder engagement at any level, is to figure out why. What is the purpose of the engagement? What's the purpose of engaging your stakeholders? It's very important to identify what the business case is, to identify why it's important for your organization, to look at what outcomes you want to achieve, to identify what level of resources you have available and your level of ambition. Step two is a little bit closer look at this level of ambition. I think as most of us on the call get really excited about the transformational possibilities of stakeholder engagement. And I think it's important to recognize that those take time and investment. And so knowing whether or not your organization is capable of that today is something to be tuned into and aware of. There's also transactional engagements, and I think these are a bit more how we traditionally engage with stakeholders today. It's usually a one-way, so from the organization to the stakeholder. There's a large number of community partners. The interaction is occasional, maybe even sporadic. The nature of trust is limited. This is sort of traditional PR, CSR kind of stuff. So there's an awareness that the business is doing this for that reason, but it's still generally thought of as a good thing. The learning is transferred from the firm to the community, so it's not coming back into the firm. The firm has control over the process, which is usually important at this point, and the benefits and outcomes are distinct. Transitional engagement, so that's somewhere in between a transformational and a transactional. This is the next step up. It's two-way, and that's the big shift, is that the communication goes both out to the community, but it also comes back to the organization, so the organization is learning. The frequency of interaction is repeated, which leads to that evolutionary building of trust. In this case, the learning is transferred to the firm, so you get to take advantage of that second tier of benefits of the information and the learning. But the firm still has control over the process. So again, I feel like this is what most organizations today are prepared to engage in, and I think there's a significant number of benefits that are available at this level. Of course, what we all get excited about, the transformational engagements, this is where we have the opportunity to change society, to change how things work. These are two-way engagements. The number of community partners is usually fewer. In other words, instead of thousands, it's enough to fit in a room and have a conversation. It could be a dozen, could be 20, could be 50, but beyond that, you usually have fewer partners who are more involved. The interaction is frequent. You're really co-creating, collaborating with the stakeholders, so there's an ongoing relational trust that's generated. The control over the process is shared, so this is where the firm has to give up some of the control. But by doing so, the benefits become significantly more. And the benefits are shared between the firm and the stakeholders. Step 3, once you've figured out what type of engagement your organization is ready for and have looked at the purpose, what's going on, you can look at who to engage, and this is where we do some stakeholder mapping. So I've included, you'll get access to a workbook tool. It's a Google Doc, but you can turn it into an Excel spreadsheet, and it walks you through this process. Once you get to this piece, stakeholder mapping, you can list out all the different stakeholders. It's great. It's a good idea to go for diversity and to be inclusive. So include even stakeholder, like hold brainstorming sessions to consider who are stakeholders that aren't traditional stakeholders that you're not thinking of. Sometimes those are the ones that can really unlock process or become key supporters. But once you've got your list of stakeholders, you need to start to prioritize and classify how to relate to them. The first tool, this is sort of the classic stakeholder management mapping tool, is interest and influence. So influence is the power to affect the organization's decisions, goals, mission, and policy, and to what degree the stakeholder can achieve or block the desired change. Interest is how interested they are in your change or policy that you're undertaking, so that they are going to be affected by the decisions, goals, mission, and policy changes. Those who are both high interest and high influence, those are going to be your key players, obviously. And the folks who have high influence, so they could put a stop to this or they could green light it, need to be kept satisfied. The ones who have high interest but maybe lower influence need to be kept informed. That's where that group of people can be great allies and a source of support during the process. Obviously, the low interest and low influence people, you need to spend minimal effort with those. Another way to map out and prioritize is based on the salience model. The salience model takes into account power, legitimacy, and urgency. So power is, again, that ability to influence or affect the outputs or outcomes. Legitimacy is how that particular stakeholder is seen by the broader community, how in other words, an organization that can confer legitimacy on a process is like, for example, the WWF, who comes in and confers legitimacy on Coca-Cola's efforts to improve its water usage. Because of that partnership and because of the legitimacy that WWF brings, they bring that piece to the table. Urgency is how urgent is this stakeholder with regards to this engagement? How urgent is it for this stakeholder? So by looking at the Venn diagram there, it creates 8 different categories of stakeholders. These are all listed in the workbook with some more definitions so you can read about each one of these. And you can classify each stakeholder as one of these types. Once you've figured out who your stakeholders are, you want to look at how to engage each one of them. So again, this is a range between very low level of effort, ambition, and also level of impact down at the bottom to ignore them, all the way up to collaborating with them. So this is an overall strategy for how to engage this particular stakeholder. And each of these strategies is tied to a number of tactics in the workbook. So everything from fact sheets to inform all the way up to product co-design sessions. The workbook lists the pros and cons of each tactic. So you can choose first the strategy and then the tactic that's appropriate for that strategy. Let's see. This 8 principles for collaborative engagement. So since we are more tuned into the transformative nature of these processes, I put together these 8 principles based on my experience of facilitating and working with groups and creating alignment around challenging issues. The first one is to prioritize diversity and be inclusive. I mentioned this one before. This is about including people who you wouldn't necessarily think of, or groups that you wouldn't necessarily think of. With the food lab, they made sure to bring in activists as well as big companies like Unilever and Costco. And the real power of the engagement is getting this diverse community with different viewpoints in a room together in conversation. The second principle is to listen first. So be aware of what your outcomes and your agenda is for the group, but tune into what do others want. This will make it much easier to convene the process and get people engaged if you're aware and meeting their needs throughout the process. Generally as well, different groups will want to make sure that their interests are heard before they can really listen or respond or adapt or change or learn from the process. So this principle of listening first to make sure that each group feels heard and that their way of seeing things is important to the group. Seek common ground. So identify where you have alignment, where your interests are the same. It can be tempting to go to a place of how we're different and to get into disagreement about how we see things or what is more important. But if you can start with the common ground and establish that first, what are we all invested in? What do we all want to see happen here? You lay the ground for better conversations when it comes to the things that are harder to agree about. Step number 4 is to create opportunities for dialogue and learning. So there's the specific outcomes that you're going for, maybe a decision or buy-in. But along the way, you want to create opportunities for dialogue. So dialogue among the different stakeholders and also as a group, as a community. The more these processes can be focused on learning, the more change and transformation is possible. The 5th one is to develop a sense of community. That goes right along with number 4. So allowing people time to come together and work together and grow together. They build relationships. Those relationships are what's the key to coming up with the solutions when you get into disagreements. Co-create for the mutual benefit and shared ownership. So start early rather than define the process and then take it out to the stakeholders. When it comes to doing transformational or collaborative work, convene the group and allow the group to co-create and share ownership in the process itself. Take action, be accountable, build trust. So action is ultimately what will build trust, and so go for results. Demonstrate results, communicate the results. It's very important, and as these engagements are somewhat radical or new, and it's very important for those of us who are spearheading this shift and this change in organizations, that we take the time to measure the results and that we can demonstrate those results to the skeptics out there. The last one is to sustain the focus over time. So it's having this be something that you do sporadically will actually harm trust and could create the opposite result of what you're trying to achieve through this. So be willing to stay in it for the long haul for a number of years and potentially even longer. Make this part of your long-term strategy and the way that you think about how to do business in today's world. Great. So good, sustainable corporate strategy boils down to how we create value. We create value by solving the problems of our time in ways that enrich ourselves and our communities. The problems we face as we enter into the sustainability crisis are by and large systemic problems. Systemic problems require systemic solutions more complex than we can handle through our own organization. Stakeholder theory is in essence about shifting the focus to the relationship systems that we are a part of. Whether we're internally or externally focused in our role, our ability to engage our stakeholders and lead generative processes will enhance our ability to solve the kinds of systemic problems that society needs us to address. The companies that will be around in 20 years will be the companies that had leaders with the courage to venture into this new territory and create the maps, the tools, the best practices necessary to create this shared value. Use the tools that you'll be getting in the link to get started, but these are only a starting place, so I'd encourage you to be in conversation with me, with each other, about how do we do this, because I believe we're all learning together. And if you do want to engage in a transformative process through your organization, know that there are resources out there to support you in that. The last poll that I've got here before we go into Q&A is the next step. So the next step for me is reading more about this theory, mapping my stakeholders, planning a new engagement, continuing with an engagement already underway, or no, something else. And again, if it's something else, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. All right, got a much more even distribution on this one. Great. Good, so we got 23% are going to be reading more about stakeholder theory. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I've got some great books. I've been doing a lot of reading on this topic over the last couple of years. 23% is going to be mapping the stakeholders, so go ahead and start with that workbook. It's a great tool to get started, and I'd love to see what you do with it or where you go with it. 46% are planning a new engagement. Wow, that's really exciting. I wish you a lot of luck, and I'd love to hear about them. And 23% are continuing with an engagement already underway. So we're going to have some time in Q&A, and those people who are already working on an engagement, I'd love to hear a little bit about it as well as we get into the questions and things like that. So good. Paula, do you want to lead us into some Q&A?
Yeah. Do you have your last slide there?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
I just wanted to see your smiling face. So let's see. I think it might be nice to start with those that are planning a new engagement and those who have a continuing engagement, if there's any specific questions anyone has for Jeremy. And I guess we could either have you ask your questions through the chat or the question box, or we could unmute
You can
folks.
raise your hand and we can unmute
You
you.
can raise your hand, yeah. Anyone having some difficulty right now with a continuing engagement or questions about one you're about to launch into that you'd like to have Jeremy answer any questions?
And Paul, I'd also add, if you've got something to share about an engagement you're working on, I'd love to
Yeah.
hear that as well. No hands are going up.
Yeah. So then I wondered too, Jeremy, there was a question about one of our attendees talks about Sodexo and how Sodexo publishes their engagement strategies. So they're very transparent about their stakeholder engagement. Now, Emma had her question answered with your 8 principles for collaboration, but I want to make sure, Emma, did you have any other more specific questions as a practitioner?
Well, and I love that. I mean, transparency probably should be up there as one of the 8, if it's not explicitly. You know, being transparent in this process. Again, you know, it's a shift for organizations to move in the direction of you know, giving up some control, and you do that when you're more transparent. But at the same time, what that does is it allows other people, organizations, other stakeholders to participate with you in the process when they know and can see for themselves what's going on and what your strategy is for the engagement. They can align with that or not.
Jeremy, for some of the folks with us today, how, if they, you know, for those who work for a government or a big corporation, what can they do if leadership within their organization isn't making broad stakeholder engagement a priority? Do you have any recommendations?
It's a great question. It's what to do if you're the internal change change agent, but you're not necessarily. It's not the need isn't necessarily perceived all the way through the organization. You know, I think that there's. So again, you know, falling back on some of the conversations that I had with Andy at Walmart, they did have support from all the way up to the CEO, although not necessarily throughout the organization. So what they did is. They started internal meetings. So they talked about their engagement was all about sustainability and particularly environmental sustainability. So they let the invited managers to participate in whatever way they could, and they held a weekly meeting that was open to anyone in the company, in the organization. And those were a time to come in, share what successes that you had during the week, and be recognized for those successes towards a more sustainable way of operating. And then also to collaborate, get questions, get ideas from each other. And so you know, it didn't take approval necessarily from anyone in the organization to start holding these meetings. But they became a great place where the people who were interested could come together and get support. And as the movement grew, it was a place for people to come when they were just checking it out to get more information. The other thing to do and to know is to start with, to consider your internal stakeholders as your first engagement. And so you can follow the same principles in terms of what are their needs, what are they looking at. You know, you want to do the best job you can to make the business case for this and start to talk to people about it, but also be really curious about, well, what are the challenges that people are facing, and how might they how might you align this with what they're looking at. There's one more story I'll share just about something I read in Business Week that I believe this was at Best Buy, and this was unrelated to environmental sustainability, but it was on the when it came to employee engagement. There was a one manager who was somewhere in the middle of the organization, definitely not near the top, who decided his team would no longer be accountable to showing up for 40 hours a week, or however many hours a week. It's more than 40 these days. But showing up was not going to be a metric for success. So they defined results, and he was really clear about tracking and measuring those results. What happened was then other people in other teams got wind of what this team was doing, And when they would ask their manager, hey, can we have the same sort of policy? So their manager would go talk to the other one, and he had the results right there to be able to point to how effective this new way of working with people was. So it slowly began to spread through the organization. By the time they went to the CEO, something like 60, 65, or 66, about two-thirds of the company was already doing this. So at this point, the CEO was, and they had a tremendous amount of evidence. So at this point, the CEO, of course, approved it and embraced it as a way of working. But it was a way that it started in a very grassroots, bottom-up fashion.
I like that. I remember Kim last week talking about how you can make cultural change from the roots up within an organization, and that's nice. I'm wondering too, Jeremy, could you address the internal-external balance and the proactive versus reactive approach as part of the strategy?
Sure. So, I'll start with the proactive reactive. So the proactive is about doing this work first. It's about mapping out your stakeholders, knowing who they are, and consciously investing in those relationships, whether there are people who are responsible for maintaining them, but you've got some kind of policy strategy in place so that you're proactively managing those relationships. That way that when a crisis or something that you didn't anticipate happens, those relationships are in place already. Reactive is what I think we tend to do more of these days, which is we are not necessarily engaging. So like with the Timberland example, Jeffrey Schwartz probably had never considered Greenpeace as a stakeholder in his organization. They hadn't necessarily invited them to the table to be in conversation with them about how they were doing their sourcing, and all of a sudden there was a crisis here that Greenpeace had decided that they were one of the organizations responsible for deforestation and climate change. So then we go into reactive mode and reactively responding to our stakeholders. But at that point, we're already on the defensive. And if those relationships aren't necessarily in place, we don't have that trust built, it's going to be a lot harder, and we're at risk of incurring significant costs and having to give a lot more ground in terms of what we're willing to do now at this point to make up for whatever the perceived crisis was or real crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other part of the question, Paula?
It's how to balance the internal and external stakeholder perspectives and
is there
interests.
and is there, like, can you say a little bit more about what that is, like in terms of the internal organizational interest, like what the organization's needs are? Yeah, go ahead.
Let's unmute Emma. Is that okay, Emma? And you can just expand a little.
Hey, Emma. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. I come from doing consulting for employee recognition programs, and I look at it that some of them are oriented around responding to, sort of risk management, which I think is sort of the external aspect, and others look at sort of their employee engagement to improve the bottom line.
Yep.
And my tactic and strategy is always to align values through employee engagement to improve whatever the situation is, whether it's internal or external. And so it's just nice to hear and think of ways that sort of the two can overlap, where the two could both be addressed in parallel, which is sometimes sort of the starting point until that overlap is met. So, it's an ongoing. I don't have very specific questions, but I think that that's something to consider and to think about is sort of, how to address those two different things. They really come from different angles, and then just sort of the strategies, because I think ultimately if you can get that overlap is where the synergy really takes place.
Absolutely. And I think even pushing up into that third tier of strategic benefits, how can we align our strategy around an employee engagement strategy? Or how does our employee engagement fit into our strategy and what we're trying to do and how we're creating value? So to be aware, I think for us to be aware as practitioners or as people who are change agents inside organizations, that there are those three levels of benefits, like you're speaking to, Emma, and that it depends on who we're presenting to. It depends on who we're talking to as far as where we put the most focus. But ideally, you're achieving benefits on all three levels.
Right.
And obviously balancing how you talk about those and what's happening and depending on the buy-in that's available.
Great,
Yeah,
great.
definitely. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Emma.
great point.
Hey, Jeremy, how does social media and other channels play into this transparency in stakeholder engagement?
I think what we've all seen is that it's forcing the issue in many ways. So at this point, trying to control your corporate messaging is a very daunting task, given how easy it is for anyone in the organization or outside the organization to reach a broad audience through social media, Facebook or Twitter, or any of the other tools out there. So. I think in some ways it's forcing the issue. We don't necessarily have a choice to not be transparent any longer.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and also it's a powerful tool that if the organization is aligned and can be transparent, you can then leverage those tools to get the word out there and to meet your customers and your other stakeholders and inform them of who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's all the more reason to kind of manage this and see it rather than be caught off guard and be reactive. That would be a disaster on social media, I would think so.
Absolutely, and I think we see that happening more and more frequently.
Great. Does anyone else have any more questions for us? Because otherwise, Jeremy, this has just been an incredible, eye-opening session. And I think once people get into your tool, some questions will be answered. It might open up a lot more. There's a lot here to think about.
Yeah, and please, this is my favorite topic to talk about and discuss. So anybody on the call here, please feel free to email me, reach out with questions. I'd love to see what you do with the spreadsheet. If you make any changes or adjustments, I'd be happy to fold those back in and put it out there for other people to use. So do stay in conversation. I'm excited to see what happens from here.
We will send out, as we did last week, a follow-up email. Jeremy is going to have links to his case studies. He's going to have his workbook tool. And again, don't forget, next week, join us again. We have 2 more webinars for you. And we want to thank you so much for your time today. It's great to get together here virtually.
Yep, echo that. Thanks very much.
Oh, and Jeremy, have a great trip.
I will. Time to get packed.
Right.
All right, take care.
Yeah. All right, thanks everyone.